Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee. Today, we are hearing from the Department of Housing and Community Development on a host of programs and issues. We call it Delegate Marvin Holmes Day here in the committee. Just a reminder to my colleagues, and I know you're all here, but tell your friends, I started in the House on the subcommittee chaired by a woman named Adrienne Jones. And if you were a minute late, you were a minute late and things had already started. So let's try to arrive on time, especially in these early days of session when we're not in as big of a rush. With that, let me turn it over to our presenters. We have Secretary Day from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and I know he's assisted by Chuck Cook, Chief Legislative Officer. Gentlemen, thank you with the topics. I know you'll go through them, but what we asked you to discuss were state revitalization programs, down payment assistance programs, state construction programs, implementation of the common ownership community website mandated by a piece of legislation the General Assembly passed, and an update on discussion of appraisal bias. We know there's an ongoing task force, again, in response to a piece of legislation the General Assembly passed. So thank you both for being here. The floor is yours.
Chair Corman, thank you so much. And thank you for the introductions. Again, my name is Jake Day. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Community Development, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. We will obviously be before you a variety of times during this session on some priority legislation, and you'll hear from us on a number of housing bills, I'm sure, that will be passing through this committee. What I wanted to do today was respond to the 5 points that Chair Corman raised for our agenda today. But let me start off just by sharing some perspective about our organization, since this is an introduction. So the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development is, yes, the housing policy agency of the executive branch, but we're also the housing finance agency. In that role, we provide development finance for affordable housing development across the state, which puts us in a group of organizations that exist on a spectrum, some with great independence from state government in other states, and others that are more closely tied to state government. We exist at the more closely tied end of HFAs, or housing finance agencies, when compared to our other organizations across the country. The reason why that's of value is we can actually participate in and have conversations about how we leverage state dollars. And for other HFAs, they kind of lust after that dynamic and wish they were more closely tied. That's the messaging I'm hearing from sister HFAs across the country. In addition to that, we operate with about 350 personnel and have a budget that ranges around, including capital dollars and the Maryland Mortgage Program that I'll talk about $2.5 billion in that are put on the street, whether through lending or grants or operating costs in the course of a fiscal year, if you look at the last few years. So I want to offer an overview to begin with of one of our signature programs, which is the State Revitalization Program. This is actually comprised of 7 subsidiary programs, and I'll talk about each in just a moment. But the state revitalization programs, I think, are one of the best uses of a taxpayer's dollar. We leverage about $11 for every dollar put into these programs in private investment, and $17 in economic impact for every dollar put into state revitalization programs. They run the gamut of projects in terms of the types of things that we can invest in. These programs collectively promote healthy and vibrant communities throughout the state. Between fiscal years 2015 and 2024, state revitalization programs, or SRPs, funding totaled nearly $466.5 million between all 7 programs. They are Community Legacy, the Maryland Facade Improvement Program, which was new last year and was an effort led by Speaker Jones, Strategic Demolition Fund statewide, Strategic Demolition Fund Project Core, and I'll get into more detail on each of these in subsequent slides. The Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund, and SEED, Community Development Anchor Institution Program for what we call, what is often referred to as EDS and MEDS. Here you'll see an overview of the eligible applicants for these programs. You can see that local governments are often our key constituency. So they're the ones applying for funding from SRP programs. Also, many of the programs are eligible for community development organizations are eligible for many of the programs, and hospitals and higher education institutions, or EDS and MEDS, are eligible for the SEED Community Development Anchor Institution Fund. So I'm going to run through some of the details of what these programs do, and you can hold right there for me, Chuck. So Community Legacy provides local governments and community development organizations with funding for essential projects aimed at strengthening communities through activities including business retention and attraction, encouraging home ownership, and commercial revitalization. Maryland Facade Improvement Program breaks out what used to be competitive with other community legacy projects, and stands alone now in its own funding program, its own critically evaluated or competitively evaluated program. The exteriors of businesses and the exterior facades of buildings in Maryland sustainable communities. The Strategic Demolition Fund is best thought of as the pre-development costs, so front-end costs for development and revitalization projects, including demolition of derelict structures, site and building acquisition, site development, and more, including architecture and engineering, so design costs in designated sustainable communities to accelerate economic development and job production. Project Core is its counterpart in Baltimore City only. So a similar program, similar bounds in terms of eligible uses, but again, is restricted to Baltimore City. We partner, by the way, and we collaborate with the Maryland Stadium Authority. This is a relationship and a partnership between the city, the state, and MSA, city, state DHCD, and MSA that you're going to hear us talk a lot about in the coming months in terms of what that relationship looks like as we move forward. The fifth, excuse me, is the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiatives, affectionately known as Bernie. In our offices and with community organizations in Baltimore City, Anne Arundel County, and Baltimore County. This is essentially community legacy. It's essentially the community legacy program, but focused on Baltimore, and passes through Bernie eligible organizations. So these are community development organizations that are identified by those three counties, or Baltimore City and Anne Arundel and Baltimore County, that have a strategic neighborhood revitalization focus in those areas. NED, which is what our affectionate name is for the National Capital Economic Development Initiative or Fund. It's similar to Bernie. But it's restricted to communities within the Beltway and Prince George's and Montgomery counties. Again, these are sustainable communities identified by National Capital Area Parks and Planning Commission, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County in partnership to identify focus areas for those investments for redevelopment efforts. And SEED is a competitive grant provision and loan provision that goes to and through anchor institutions. It's important that I note that you may be familiar with the RISE zone, which requires, the RISE zone legislation required that those institutions have a physical role and a physical presence in the recipient of RISE zone funds. SEED does not work the same way. SEED is any eligible community development activity, project, reinvestment, economic development initiative, home ownership, revitalization initiative, but the funds pass through and are in partnership with and must be sponsored by those higher education or hospital institutions. So in other words, if you've got a university, a community college, a hospital in your district that has community and economic development goals that might not include their offices or facilities, but rather broad economic and community development goals, this is the program for them. They can have a presence, they just don't need to have a presence. Governor Moore announced recently, with the most recent announcement of awards, $63.7 million across these 7 programs. And the awards went to, as I indicated, community development organizations, counties, municipal governments, special taxing districts, and hospitals and higher education institutions. And they will fund 219 projects that will go directly to support local revitalization efforts in and across 23 jurisdictions in Maryland. In total, for the last award round, you can go to the next slide, please. The department received 378 applications, requesting $214 million in capital funds. So we're able to award about $1 in $6 requested, given funding, our current funding amounts. And we were able to award $5 million in operating funds. The department had in FY24 $51.5 million in capital funds available, unrestricted capital funds available, and $700,000 in operating funds. So we were able to work in partnership with Bernie organizations and many of these other institutions to leverage additional funds to help achieve the objectives of the local officials and organizations that were included. All projects awarded SRP funds are located within a sustainable community boundary and help achieve the outcomes that are identified in that jurisdiction's adopted Sustainable Communities Action Plan. The department, and I want to talk a little bit about process here. The department divides the state into 7, soon to be 8 regions, each with a corresponding project manager. We just hired our 8th project manager, a position that was new in the most recent budget. And for the review of the SRP application, each review team includes the project manager as well as additional representatives from state agencies across state government. And the reasoning here is to essentially have a clearinghouse type process, but upfront in our review. So we have folks from Maryland Historic Trust, MDE, MDOT, Department of Planning, and beyond to ensure that we were getting a whole and comprehensive look at the project proposals coming out of communities. Each applicant was judged on a 100-point scoring system based on a variety of criteria that you can see here. In addition to the criteria that you see here, and I think we might have it on the next slide, Chuck, if you can advance for me. In addition to the criteria that you saw there, like timeline, scope, financing, and organizational capacity. So we try to take a look not only at the project, but the organization that is proposing it. We also reviewed additional considerations, including righting the wrongs of the past, so historical injustices visited upon communities, and the efforts of these projects to correct those injustices, prioritizing diversity and equity in the project implementation team, addressing social determinants of health in disinvested communities, increasing community resilience to the effects of climate change, contributing to the economic strength of the state's 34 Main Street communities, promoting access to mixed income housing and transit-oriented development, and lastly, considering geographic diversity of the awards and making sure that every applicant jurisdiction received fair consideration. And I'm proud to say that every jurisdiction that applied for awards received them in this round. The next program that we wanted to highlight, actually, before we do have this map. This is just a map of PFAs and sustainable communities. You can see that closely follows the population dispersion of the state, as well as every municipality in the state, which I think is important as the former president of the Maryland Municipal League. Mr. Chair, would you like me to pause at the end of each to take questions, or would you like me to run through our presentation?
Thank you for raising that, Mr. Secretary. I meant to say that up front, but I was so busy scolding people for being late that I missed my opportunity. We'll take all the questions at the end, so please continue on through, and then we'll do a consolidated set of questions at the end.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
My pleasure. The next program that we wanted to share, you can advance, thank you, is information on our home ownership programs. The primary umbrella of the home ownership programs of the state is the Maryland Mortgage Program, or MMP. The department's home ownership programs have been incredibly successful in serving, on average, 50 to 80% area median income families and households over the last 4 years, averaging about $1 billion in mortgages a year. With less funds available in the budget in FY25 than in 24, the department is looking for market-based solutions. And we have a variety of tools that we can put to use to address that, including the interest rates themselves. So we do have some flexibility in how we set those interest rates. Of course, we have to balance that against what's happening in the market to ensure that we actually have a competitive product to put on out in the marketplace for down payment and closing cost assistance. So the Maryland Mortgage Program provides 30-year flexible, 30-year fixed rate home loans to eligible home buyers purchasing in Maryland. It offers competitive interest rates that I mentioned, stability, flexibility, and a range of assistance and closing cost programs. We support FHA, VA, USDA, and conventional loans through an approved network of 100 plus private lenders. All MMP loans are serviced through our partner, U.S. Bank. More than 98% of MMP borrowers are first-time homebuyers. The department offers the MMP First-Time Advantage loan to eligible first-time homebuyers, providing the lowest 30-year fixed-rate interest rate available for Maryland Mortgage Program loans. We also have the MMP Flex loan, which is a 30-year fixed-rate home loan product accompanied by additional funds for down payment and closing cost assistance. The assistance is available in the form of a no-interest deferred loan, deferred to the end of the mortgage period. And the department also offers partner match, whereby we offer funding in tandem with funding provided by employers, provided by local jurisdictions, and others to incentivize live near your work, live near your worship, live near your school, and a variety of other programs that are out there. There's a wide range of organizations the department partners with, including, like I mentioned, employers, home builders, and real estate developers. We'll partner right with them to create a product to help encourage buyers to their product. Community organizations, we partner with community and neighborhood organizations to encourage home ownership as a way of building sustainable neighborhoods. And of course, we partner with local governments like cities, towns, and counties. Funds are available through the partner match provided in the form of also a no interest deferred loan. The department also offers a variety of special loans. Some of those are listed here. You can see that we partnered with jurisdictions like Montgomery County, the city of Greenbelt. We have something called Home Ability to assist homebuyers with disabilities. This is a very popular program. We do expend all of those funds quickly in the course of a year. And Maryland Smart Buy, which I think is probably our most popular program, recently copied, including its name. We should have trademarked it by the state of Illinois. The beauty of this program, which also runs out of its funds quickly, is that we don't offer a grant to the homeowner. Rather, we pay down their educational debt. So we assist them with their debt to income ratio by taking care of some of their college debt or student debt that they have, and thereby helping in the form of, on average, $50,000. Now, we do have to, in order to stretch those dollars later in the year, we do have to reduce the amount available, but we find that it's a popular product even at $30,000, $25,000, and $20,000 price point. Next, I want to talk a little bit about our multifamily housing construction efforts. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're Maryland's housing finance agency. We're its development finance agency. And so our multifamily housing construction programs are critical tools in the department's toolbox to create more of that affordable housing. And in the context of a 96,000 housing unit shortage, this is one of the most important tools that we have to addressing the shortage that we have and the scarcity problem that we have. Prioritizing the creation of affordable rental housing ultimately also helps those families that are at the lower income end of the spectrum. This is a necessary part of the mix of housing unit requirements that we're experiencing out there in the world. Yes, we believe supply is necessary. Yes, we believe market rate housing is necessary, but we also know that at the end of the day, the bottom part of the market will require low income guaranteed affordable units. The first of these programs is called Rental Housing Works. This is the one you may be most familiar with, and I think most people I run into are most familiar with. This provides subordinate gap financing for projects financed using DHCD's multifamily bond program, which is our 4% program, and the low income housing tax credit program. Projects requesting Rental Housing Works funding must meet the requirements for both of those programs to be bond financed or to receive tax credits. We also have the rental housing finance program, which is compatible with tax exempt or taxable bond financing, low-income housing tax credits, and other public or private funds. And that includes the rental housing program and the federal home program. The last one I'll share is the partnership rental housing program. This is an important program to participate with PHAs, with those housing authorities in your jurisdictions that are looking to renovate, looking to expand, looking to reorient, even to privatize those public housing units that they may have in their jurisdiction. In most cases, this is going to target the very lowest, in some cases 30% below, usually 50% below AMI, the very lowest household income households in your jurisdictions. Entities that can take advantage of the partnership rental housing program include PHAs, includes the local governments themselves, includes COCs, the homelessness continuums of care, as well as community action agencies like CAN and Shore Up across the state that have gotten into the public housing, public-private housing partnership development business. It also can include other organizations, nonprofits, housing counseling agencies. We've seen habitats, habitats and neighborhood housing corporations get involved as well. And there are other state agencies that have participated through the partnership rental housing program as well. Here you'll see that the process for applying is very simple and very easy. That's a joke, and it is simplified here. It is a cumbersome and long process, admittedly, and developers, of course, want it to be easier. But at the end of the day, we are underwriting. These are not grants. We are underwriting these projects. We are ensuring that we are invested for the long term. And the beauty of our investment is not just that we are helping to produce additional housing units, but that we are engaged over the long term, over the life of these projects, to ensure that renters are safe, that they have adequate, fair, affordable housing, that issues such as mold, heating and ventilation systems can be addressed by the department. Essentially, the way our powers exist today, we're not a regulatory body, generally speaking. We're not an oversight agency, generally speaking. We have limited powers in that regard. And the way in which we have most of those powers and responsibilities is when we have a financial instrument invested in these projects. So it's very important that we ensure that the taxpayer dollars are invested in these projects are done so to the minimal amount to get the job done. That is why the underwriting process and why our team of underwriters are so important. It's also why we fight really hard to make sure that they are fairly compensated so that we can keep those folks. I'll remind you that our main office is in Lanham, in Prince George's County. There's a lot of competition for talent in Lanham, particularly being at a Metro and MARC and Amtrak stop, when they can easily commute to a job at the federal government, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, or private sector. So I thank you for all you have done to ensure that we have competitive wages to keep the best talent in our underwriting team. So what you can see here is that there is an application process. There is an underwriting process that we monitor closely, the construction and construction financing dynamic, and that ultimately we monitor compliance throughout the life cycle of the commitments, the 40-year life cycle, as well as for the rehabilitation and redevelopment of these sites. Often we're involved in financing, redevelopment, and recapitalization of these properties. I also know, and I want to move to a related housing topic. I know that there is an interest here in common ownership community and our responsibilities to create the common ownership community website. And this was a result of House Bill 844 requiring DHCD to create and maintain a webpage regarding common ownership communities such as condominiums and HOAs. Oversight of these entities I know is of great interest. I also know that this is part of that spectrum of ensuring that tenants and homeowners have quality, fair, safe, affordable, and livable housing circumstances. So I want to give you an update on the website and our responsibilities under them. In early fall of 2023, the department reached out to Delegate Holmes, who graciously granted our request for a little more time for the new administration to implement the website. It is now live. I encourage you to check it, and we can make sure that that link is provided. Has this clickable link been provided to the?
It's embedded in
It's embedded
in the presentation for
Okay.
members of ENT.
Okay, so fantastic. Thank you. So our OAG, Mark Petraskas, who is the Assistant Attorney General and his team in DHCD is finalizing the language around the rights and responsibilities of residents within common ownership communities. So that is an addendum that we'll be adding to the website soon. We anticipate that section will be completed by the end of next week. Since House Bill 844 was passed into law, CoreLogic, one of the largest vendors of proprietary housing data, terminated the service that had compiled and provided all of the information that we used to create this website. Therefore, we'll be doing this manually from here on out. DHCD will have to compile this list manually and maintain it and add to it. But the master list exists, but we'll be adding to it one entry at a time moving forward. This effort is already underway to ensure that we don't get out of date or out of compliance. But because it will consist of tens of thousands of entries, it will end up being a perpetual work in progress, requiring frequent additions and edits. So I wanted you to be aware that we are devising how we're going to staff that moving forward, but we are committed to complying with the requirements of the legislation. Once we have information on a sufficient baseline number of common ownership communities, we can publish and update the list with additional batches of information. That's probably how we'll do it in batches periodically. That could be a monthly cycle, but we'll make sure that we are communicating what that looks like as we move forward. Lastly, I want to talk about our efforts to address appraisal bias. We have two avenues that we are focused on as an agency. The first is the recently announced program called Uplift. The Uplift stands for Utilizing Progressive Lending Investments to Finance Transformation. The second arm that we're focused on is the Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity Task Force required by House Bill 1097, which is developing a set of recommendations to address and prevent appraisal bias across Maryland. This task force is focused on preventing individual biases and the historical impact of systematic racist appraisal practices. The Uplift program will address homes impacted by appraisal gaps by accelerating the pace of new construction and rehabilitation of quality, affordable housing in strategically identified communities across Maryland. You can learn more about this on the DHCD housing programs page on our website, which includes a map of uplift areas. You can go into a GIS map and you can zoom in on your jurisdictions. It exists uplift qualified areas per the legislation that allows for this appraisal gap program, includes locations in each Maryland jurisdiction. Uplift builds on the department's past initiatives. You may be familiar with what was called Home Ownership Works, or HOW, that had a pilot program in the Johnson Square neighborhood in Baltimore City and in the Pine Street neighborhood in Cambridge. This expands that again statewide. Those initiatives were public-private partnerships to invest in historically disinvested communities. Through this program, selected developers who apply will build, sell, and rehabilitate quality, affordable housing in targeted neighborhoods. They'll do so, by the way, in partnership with a community organization and with their local jurisdiction. That's required part of the application. They'll also do so in accordance with design and construction standards that ensure quality, timely production, and accountability, something that we've been able to ensure in the two pilot areas. Chuck, if you will go to the next slide, please. The Property Appraisal and Valuation Equity Task Force has been meeting since late October to identify the key drivers of persistent and systematic appraisal gaps and propose solutions. This is a precursor to what will be ultimately the state housing plan that also seeks to address the appraisal gap and appraisal bias challenges that we are facing in certain disinvested communities. This task force has been divided into several subcommittees or sub-task forces that focus on 5 topic areas outlined in the enabling legislation. They are government oversight and industry standards, appraiser training, barriers to entering the profession, appraisal reconsideration processes, and automated valuation models. Subcommittees are in the fact-finding phase of identifying the challenges faced in each of these topics, and each subcommittee is responsible for proposing solutions to the full task force, which will ultimately evaluate and eventually adopt formal recommendations. So with that, I know we covered a lot of ground, and there is more to our agency, I assure you. There's actually a typo I'm going to address in just a second, but this is our contact information. My email address is in fact Jake jacob.day, jake.day at maryland.gov. I don't know if jacob.day forwards automatically. That should be something we set up if we haven't done so already. But that is also my cell phone number and Chuck's cell phone number. We'd love to discuss any of these topics and take any questions. Mr. Chair, thank you for your hospitality and your time.
Thank you. Let's also find out if Charles got Cook automatically. On the appraisal task force, real quick, do you know when you expect that report?
Chuck, do we have an estimated date?
So it was originally set for June 28th. And I want to thank Delegate Holmes there. He actually has a bill in to give us an extension of time, showing us some grace on getting that set up and running. So as of right now, under code, it's June, the end of June, June 30th, I believe, is when that's actually due. And the bill, I believe, in question would probably extend that until October 28th. Is that correct, Delegate Holmes? December. Okay. So June or December based on the passage of that bill, Chairman.
Great. Thank you. Questions, Delegate Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all so much for coming. Great to see you guys. This was another great presentation. My question goes back to rental housing works, which I believe, like you said, a lot of folks in this room are familiar with. My question is, I don't think it's required by state law, but is there a reason in particular that the agency has taken the posture that it needs to be the agency's bonds that are used to participating stakeholders, rather than allowing, for example, and of course, I have one PHA in mind in particular, but rather than allowing local PHAs or other entities that want to use and can use their own bonds to do that?
Delegate Stewart, thank you very much for that question. If you don't mind, I'm going to take the opportunity, and I will answer your question, I assure you, to just note that the Rental Housing Works program, which is a limited funding source, is probably the most coveted money in the process of financing affordable housing development. Many of the proposed developments in the state are dependent upon that program to close gaps. It's as good as a cash investment. It's as good as a grant in terms of their pro formas. And so particularly right now, with the COVID vintage of project, what we've seen is a ballooning in project costs, whether inflation, supply chain, interest rates, you name it, labor market, all those challenges. But the compounding effect is this COVID vintage of project that wasn't designed, it didn't come into the pipeline with all of those factors mapped out. And so they can't close the gap. And they are, many of those organizations, a lot of them nonprofit developers, but this is true for for-profit developers as well, are drowning as a result. And so I would just note that addressing that backlog and addressing that, again, particular vintage of project is so critical right now. And the CIP as proposed and the budget this year as proposed, the governor's budget as proposed, do that. They do help us get out of that backlog and into a more stable dynamic moving forward. It's not this ever-ending increase is what I want to point out. In fact, the CIP envisions a trailing off of an increase in a trailing off, but those funds will always be important because it's as good as cash. And so the only reason behind why the department has taken the position and takes the position that using the department's bonding capacity to pair with those dollars rather than awarding them to particular, especially the larger and more capable and sophisticated PHAs, is because of how the ratings agencies look at our investments. So my understanding is that the ratings agencies view those things as best when not separated, and best when paired together. I think we're flexible and we always want to have the conversation. And I, especially as the new guy in town, I pushed back on that fairly early on. And it wasn't until meeting with Moody's and meeting with Fitch and meeting with these folks that I better understood why it's advantageous to ultimately our position and how they are viewed or how we are viewed by the ratings agencies, and ultimately what that means for how far we can extend an allocated state dollar. So I think it's worth continuing to have an open door to the conversation, and I assure you we will do that with our friends in any PHA, but that is my understanding.
That's helpful. I appreciate it. One other question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. I know that that partnership rental housing, one thing that's come up in this committee before is that I think that across these programs that y'all have, some of them are based on area mean income, which was cited. And obviously we have, at least 2 or 3 sort of areas for purposes of area mean income, the one I live in being the highest priced. But I know that partnership and maybe a couple of others actually still use a state median income and not an area median income, which has the effect of putting the finger on the scale against parts of the state that have a higher AMI than the state's median income. So I guess my question is, do you guys, probably not, but do you know offhand which ones rely on AMI, which programs rely instead on state median income? And do you think that there is any wisdom in unifying it across one standard?
To answer your question, Delegate, I don't know the answer of which relies on statewide versus which allows for area median income at a MSA or sub MSA level. What I do know is that there are some of each. Yes. I think it is absolutely worth our investigation into what power we have, and this is a conversation with HUD, what power we have to differentiate at a finer grain of geography, at a smaller geography. This has come up, the inverse has, not the inverse, but the other side of the MSA AMI conversation has come up where, let's use Washington, for example. The Washington Metropolitan Statistical Area AMI is fairly high. And when you look at certain counties that are in the MSA, that are suburban typically, or exurban, sort of further afield, you end up with a much lower AMI for that county or a municipality within their jurisdiction. And they're penalized in terms of what median income a family, let's think about a voucher program, for example, has to produce to bring alongside the voucher that they receive, even to cover the minimal portion that they have to cover out of pocket. So I think it's a challenge worth investigating. It's something we've talked about internally. I know we haven't come to any conclusions, but we'll spend time working on it.
Great. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Delegate Stewart. Delegate Long.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and Chuck as well. Just a very brief question. It's about the specialty loans portion of your presentation. Just wondering, different categories you have: Montgomery County, eligible home buyers, and HomeAbility, Maryland Smart Buy, and the Greenbelt. How do those particular unique programs come about, and then how does that list become more expansive to perhaps different counties or different jurisdictions? Just curious about that.
Yeah. So Delegate, I can tell you that the history is a little bit different for each of those 4 programs. With respect to Smart Buy, actually it's different, but they're somewhat similar. So knowing the history of each of those 4 programs, they each generate from what I think we could term as an interested party. In the case of the Montgomery County and Greenbelt initiatives, the interested party was the local government. So Montgomery County, Greenbelt, City of Greenbelt, and those representing those areas had an interest and helped to devise a program and a product created specifically for them. Now, in both of those cases, the local jurisdiction has to come with matching resources. So we're in it together, 50-50. In the case of HomeAbility, I believe the advocate in that case, and there may be a multitude of advocates that fought for that, but I believe that the Maryland Department of Disabilities was one of the advocates. And with respect to Smart Buy, I just heard this history the other day, the higher education, State Department of Higher Education had an interest in finding some sort of solution. This was pre any conversation of, Biden administration, which I know never happened, but elimination of student debt. So the need was there post 2008 to try to do something to address rising student debt and the effect that had on home ownership. So I think any interested party could come with an idea and we could find a product, we could design a product to partner alongside of them with using our state allocation, a portion of our state allocated resources. So I would say when we think about geography, counties, cities, towns, if they can find something in their budgets, even something modest to put toward attracting homeowners for their community, that can go a long way and we can double their efforts.
Delegate Long, Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary up here. I just have two quick questions.
Yes.
One of the things, obviously you're wrestling, like we all are, with the skyrocketing cost of housing and the lack of not enough housing, which is making that even more so. Your program that is tied, to median income and housing affordability. I mean, even if you meet the median, the income levels, are there any housing locations that are available at those levels? Whatever the percentage of the median income you're dealing with, or are you trying to tie them more together so that it's related to the housing costs?
Well, the fact of the matter is, Delegate, that we are short up and down the price range. We are short housing. And I think what we have attempted to identify with the governor's priority legislation, the three bills that have been proposed, as well as our executive actions designed to make it easier to produce housing, is that we must produce more supply up and down the range. The housing market is a market, and supply and demand apply. Rules of supply and demand do apply. But that we are certain that at the lowest end of the price range, that even as we add housing supply, it is never possible. I don't want to say it's never easy. It's never possible for the marketplace to produce those lowest income units without significant subsidy. They don't happen but for DHCD's programs. They don't happen but for some of the larger PHAs and the affordable housing that they produce in limited supply beyond DHCD's production. So it is absolutely critical that we insist upon the creation of additional units. So to answer your question about whether or not they exist, if endless vouchers existed for low-income families, the answer is no. Those housing units are not available today. And so we have to produce, as we talk about adding to the state housing voucher program, as we argue for more project-based and housing choice vouchers in the state, we have to also be adding supply simultaneously, or else those families will still be longing for a place to live.
Okay. And the other question has to do with the other end of the spectrum. You did not mention it at all in your presentation. And that is, I don't know, do you have programs that are geared toward seniors aging in place in their homes? They've paid off their mortgage and they are not as solvent as they used to be to do maintenance or renovations to keep up the value of those properties?
Yes, ma'am. So great question. And you're right. I didn't cover this part of our work. Let me offer two things. One, a significant portion of our rental housing works dollars and our bond financed and tax credit financing goes to create new senior restricted, age restricted developments and communities. So I don't have a percentage on how many of the units we create each year are senior housing, but we can get you that information. And it's a significant percentage. So that's number one. Number two, with respect to legacy homeowners, this is so important. We often find that income restricted homeowners, legacy homeowners, might no longer have a mortgage, but they have home repair costs that are rising and becoming cumbersome. Historically, DHCD has had two types of programs to help. One is our energy efficiency work to help with HVAC systems, insulation, et cetera. And the other is our critical repair work to focus on things like accessibility, roofs, broken, appliances, things like that. Those two programs traditionally have been firewalled from one another. And so we would often find that an inspector from DHCD and a contractor who we're paying with our special loans program would walk into a home with energy efficiency money approved, would find a critical repair issue and have to walk away. Today, those are combined now in what's now termed DHC's division of whole home repairs. So when an inspector from DHCD and a contractor who we're paying walk into a home, they can spread those dollars across whatever whatever issue they encounter, whether that's energy efficiency or a critical repair issue. I'll also note that on the energy efficiency issue, the PSC recently authorized $354 million additional dollars over the next 3 years in low-income families for whole home repairs for energy efficiency repairs within that category of whole home. But special loans almost exclusively go to low-income senior or income-restricted senior households to address exactly what you're talking about. And those loans are deferred until after the sale of a home and up to 30 years.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Delegate Healy. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I'm sorry, I was thinking other people had lit up before me. So 2 questions. One is, and if I saw it and I missed it, my apologies, but are any of your housing revitalization programs available for projects to house homeless folks? And what would those be? And to include transitional housing rather than permanent housing for either homeless or at-risk folks.
Delegate, yes, quite a few. So 2 weeks ago, we announced our new Assistant Secretary of Homeless Solutions and a new division of Homeless Solutions designed to elevate that work and expand the funding that we're providing in capacity for our efforts to reduce homelessness in Maryland. There's some policy changes that come along with that, including prioritizing and focusing on permanent supportive housing, focusing on housing first policy. This is also part of a long-term industry shift toward what will ultimately actually reduce homelessness. The programs that they run are in part federal. So we have a variety of federal programs. We support agencies through our Homelessness Solutions Program, or HSP, which puts forth about $28 million in combined state and federal dollars each year to all of the COCs around the state. We also established a statewide or a balance of state COC, which combines, I think it's 14 of the 24 jurisdictions in the state in one COC. And these are really for some of the smaller jurisdictions to assist them in having more sophistication and staff support. So DHCD staff acts as the brokers of their resources and partners with them. In addition to that, we have the Shelter and Transitional Homeless Program. That is a housing finance program to build shelters and to build transitional housing. So that is directly designed to do that. Unfortunately, I will note that that is a small program. We'd love for it to be larger one day, but it's been historically a small program, and it's one where we think we can have a lot of effect if we're able to grow it. It operates a lot like our other finance programs. It works with developers or a nonprofit or community organization or a COC to develop housing. And then I want to take you back to our grants. So all of the grants could fund, every one of those state revitalization programs grants I mentioned could fund shelters. It could fund food banks or any of the ancillary functions. So, an organization like CAN in Baltimore County that I mentioned, or Garrett Community Action in Garrett County, or Shore Up on the Lower Shore, or Delmarva Community Services. Any of those would be eligible applicants for like our community legacy funding, and they could use those monies directly. And I'm using those examples because I think they have to fund shelters or things that support the homeless population in their communities.
Great. Well, thank you for that very comprehensive answer. I'd like to follow up with you offline about a project in my district
Happy
that
to.
actually serves 3 counties. So, and then my second question is whether DHCD can enter into, or does it ever enter into project labor agreements on construction projects? And also, do you pay prevailing wage? And if you don't, why not?
Fair question. And I would need to check to make sure. I'm not 100% sure. Chuck, do you know the answer to that?
For the most part, that's driven by the developer and the folks that are doing the construction, and that wouldn't be a direct contract the DHCD would go into on that.
Okay, but if
so I'm not-
if DHCD is in the driver's seat on the financing, why could DHCD not say that that is going to be a condition of the project?
No, here, and we're gonna follow up to find out exactly on our division of credit assurance, what we can do on that end, for sure.
Okay.
The one thing I'll add to that, and so I'm not sure, but we'll look into it. But the one thing I'll add to that is many of our projects, not all of them, but many of the things that we are involved in include federal dollars. And anything that include federal dollars as a pass through will require that federal wage requirements are met. So, you know, I have seen countless projects that pair state and federal dollars, where we'll have a CDBG component to a project and a strategic demolition component to a project. The entire project must then follow the federal wage requirements. And so I don't know what the percentage is of projects that involve a federal dollar, but I'll find that out as well, and we'll get you an answer to that question.
Great, that would be helpful. And then if you could find out if DHCD has in recent years ever done a PLA, I would be interested to know.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We'll
thank you.
check on it.
Delegate
Thank you,
Davis.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Day, my question is on the Common Ownership Community website. Several jurisdictions are looking to mandate training for community board members, community ownership board members. And I'm wondering if this could be a place that we could direct them to, the website, and if you're willing to expand it to more training.
Delegate, I don't think that would be challenging at all for us to add training resources and a training resource subpage to the website. I'm looking at Delegate Holmes to see if you have an opinion there. But I don't think it would be difficult. I think the bigger lift is maintaining the scale of condo associations, HOAs, now that our private source for the information has quit the business. I think that's the bigger challenge. As far as our role in that training, again, I think providing sources of information and keeping those updated, I think would be a fairly small lift. We need to make sure that we validated that those are appropriate, up to date, and that they meet the jurisdiction's desires. But again, that wouldn't be that difficult, I wouldn't think.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Davis. Since you mentioned that, let me just chime in. I was able to navigate to the website by clicking on the link, but I could not navigate it by going to your homepage. Even using the search engine and searching common ownership in quotes did not bring it up. So you might want to look at how people are going to be able to find it other than clicking.
Mr. Chair, I was just in the hallway talking to Secretary Savage, and I was learning about the website modernization efforts of the state, and I asked for DHCD to be at the front end of the queue. So we will include that note as we engage, do it.
Sounds good. Delegate Terrassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and the things that you told us about today. They're all wonderful things. One of the things that I thought I heard you say though was, Mr. Secretary, that there's never going to be able to be produced enough, maybe I have this wrong, affordable housing without subsidies. Is that sort of, do I have that right?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct.
So
yes.
I guess, and I agree that without requiring it to be built, so that's true. Have you looked at the idea, I know in the housing package, you're already, I don't know how to say this, treading a little into land use. And so I'm wondering if there was a thought about requiring developers to build affordable housing whenever they're building housing.
So Delegate, absolutely. So the bill that addresses land use, that discusses land use, it does that. And it does it in such a way as to one, acknowledge this state's pretty remarkable history and leadership in saying that there statewide are areas where we shouldn't build housing. right? What we've never done is incentivized building housing in the places where we think it should be. The bill does that. So it incentivizes, it provides a market incentive, an economic incentive to developers to build housing
Right.
with a density bonus in certain areas. There's three areas: nonprofit owned land, transit oriented development, and then former state owned properties. What it also does, though, is it requires that as those developers get that economic incentive, that they include affordable housing units. I think there can be robust debate, and there will be robust debate as to whether or not we got those numbers right, whether it's the right percentage, whether it's too much, too little. And I think that's a fair debate for the General Assembly to have. And I know that developers will help you figure out the answer to that question. Advocates will help you figure out the answer to that question. But what we believed was we had to be honest in acknowledging that if we simply 10 years from now look back on creating that development incentive and just the density bonus and did not produce those units that are restricted for lower income families, we will have not certainly met the governor's vision of leaving nobody behind. And I think we'd all feel guilty because of it. And so I think it does it. It does it in a fairly narrow band, only in those three target areas. But you're right that I believe that you're right that including those units will guarantee that not only do middle income families, not only does the middle class and higher end and moderate income families do well, but also low income families will do better.
Okay, and I really appreciate that. And I know we're scheduled to talk a little bit more offline, which I look forward to. I guess for the purposes of this conversation, I really appreciate those things that you're doing and wonder if you're thinking about a more broad requirement in all development, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, Delegate, I think, it's a worthy conversation because you can see jurisdictions thinking about this. I mean, you can see Baltimore County and Howard County and Anne Arundel County grappling with this issue. You can see other jurisdictions, Queen Anne's County, Montgomery County, that have done it and have some successes to point to. And so there's a mixed landscape, and as a result, I think it's a worthy conversation when the General Assembly is ready for that conversation.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Terrassa. Delegate Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Secretary Day, thank you for your presentation today. And I wanted to go back to the energy efficiency loans that you talked about. I'm glad to see you merge those two together, where rarely do you walk into a house that needs some sort of repair that you don't find something else. So it's good that you did merge these. But, I'm kind of curious as, I guess the people that would qualify, for the energy efficiency loan. Could you give me like an example, like if they had some sort of furnace issue, say the furnace went bad and they had limited income, and say that would a heat pump be within reason to put back into that residence? I mean, what limit do you go on these loans? Or at the energy efficiency level, do you switch from, say, an oil-fired furnace that went bad to then would a heat pump be installed? Would that be part of your program?
Delegate, I would.
Mayor Delegate.
Mayor Delegate, I apologize. I tried and I got it wrong. So it's my understanding that you use the example you just used is something that has indeed happened. I think fairly often that failing HVAC elements, maybe outdated ones, have been replaced with energy efficient heat pumps. The same is true for hot water heaters. The same being true for a variety of appliances that we can include in our our work, eligible work includes updating and replacing those appliances. The Public Service Commission's recent approval included a pretty detailed list of the objectives of each of the energy companies out there, or utility companies, from Washington Gas to Delmarva Power and Exelon. It includes each of their eligible activities, so we can make that available to the committee if you'd like. I think we can also provide some examples or a list of the kind of broad spectrum of eligible activities under both types of loans, so that you can speak with your constituents about what we can do and what we can't do. There are cosmetic things that we can't do typically. I will say that even those bounds have been flexed at times when it's a targeted area. So I think we put special loans, for example, into the Homeownership Works pilot districts in Johnston Square and Pine Street to help with even facade improvements. That was before the Maryland Facade Improvement Program existed, but to help with cleaning up the neighborhood collectively, as well as having the targeted home development infill projects.
Yeah, if you could get us some information on like examples and and the providers, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Delegate Jacobs. I now yield to Chair Holmes for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was intentionally attempting to be last in our questions. I don't have a whole lot, but good to see you, Secretary Day, Mr. Cook. One of the things you mentioned was your office in Lanham. And one of the things that we recognize is that DHCD is the only state office located in Prince George's County. Sponsorship by yours truly, with the assistance of the then Lieutenant Governor. So we had a lot of discussions about that, and glad to see you there.
Mr. Chair, we love our offices.
There's a couple of things that were discussed. The website that you discussed, I'm glad to see you getting that up and running. That has been a discussion since 2005. We finally got that up and running. I appreciate that. One of the things that has been discussed is the mandatory training portion. There is a piece of legislation that is working its way through, but it did not suggest DHCD to be the lead on it, primarily because of resistance of predecessors of yours. So the Attorney General's office was suggested because if there's a formal complaint, it also goes to the Attorney General's office. But I would ask that if training is offered now in some jurisdictions, primarily Montgomery County, Prince George's County. And then I'm understanding that there will also be more training available in a couple of the community colleges coming up. So perhaps those URLs could be added to the DHCD website. The other thing that I would like to talk about is one of your comments about we will probably never be able to get enough affordable housing, and I totally agree with you. One of the things that we've been working in my office is land banks, and every jurisdiction in Maryland has current vacant and abandoned properties. And what we would like to try to do, Mr. Secretary, is try to get these land banks and these current vacant and abandoned properties put together in a package so that DHCD can, in fact, try to help reduce this void of affordable housing. And the reason why I'm picking on vacant and abandoned property and land banks is because the initial cost of the property is low. We've had land bank legislation in previously, and we'll probably have some more in there too. But most of the things that that have been already asked are on my list, which is why I specifically chose to be the last. And thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Cook, for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Isn't that so?
Yes, so. I think that's so.
Mr. Secretary, I don't know if there's anything you want to respond to in there.
Just a couple of quick thoughts. One, vacant and abandoned properties. What I'd like to say is that this is not just a Baltimore City challenge. This is a 24 jurisdiction problem. We've got them in my hometown in Salisbury, and nearly every place I visit, and I've been to every county in this state, has vacant and abandoned properties. So I couldn't agree with you more that we need to be comprehensive in our approach. And what I will offer, and I know this is not the time to discuss legislation, but what I will offer is that our Housing and Community Development Financing Act of 2024, one of the things that it does is it changes a little bit of language on the strategic demolition program to allow for us to use those funds for debt service. So the Community Development Administration, which is a part of DHCD, which is our bank, our lending institution could issue debt and then use the state allocation to repay that debt, which would dramatically increase, without changing the allocation, it would dramatically increase the resources we had available one time, which would take us probably years to spend, but available to address the significant concentration of vacants that we have in certain jurisdictions in the state and broadly. So it would mean rather than having $10 million in strategic demolition money available, we might be able to leverage $100 million. And rather than having $50 million in Project Core money in Baltimore City, we might be able to have $500 million. And so I point that out only to think about not exactly the figure that's going to be available, but just so we know that that small change in language will enable us to respond as the market needs. And I think that's so important because the vacancy problem is not just missed economic opportunity. It's not just missed revenue. It's not just people not paying taxes. It's not just missed valuation from assessment. It's the carrying costs. Jurisdictions are overburdened. When I talk to friends in Cumberland, when I talk to friends in Crisfield, when I talk to friends in Baltimore, these jurisdictions are overwhelmed by the costs, both direct, firefighting, and we also know the cost to lives, code enforcement, having to board these things up, having to inspect them, but also the indirect costs on neighborhoods around them. The faster we address the problem, which is going to take scale and increase in scale, but the faster we address the problem, the more we not only get that revenue back, but we address the carrying costs, which is a giant deficit that's going to hit us every year for the years to come that we don't aggressively address this problem. And if I may, one last thought. I just want to respond to your comment, Mr. Chair, on the website. It is not lost on me that your individual grace and goodwill on allowing us more time is an individual exercise. But I just want you to know, and I want the entire committee to know, that we take reporting requirements seriously. We take the deadlines you give us and the tasks that you give us seriously. We didn't ask for more time because we weren't taking that seriously. Frankly, we were playing a little bit of catch up, and we ensure that we will give all of those responsibilities the attention required so that we don't have to ask for permission for more time in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do not see any other questions. Great. Well, as you said, you'll be with us many other times this session, so we look forward to having you back. Thank you so much for today's presentation. Colleagues, thank you all for your engagement this afternoon. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
You're adjourned.
Going to Rouse's office. Rouse's office next.
Some people here. And then they're here.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Then we'll go over there.